I'm Josh.
I'm Lisa.
And I'm Nemo. And we just nerd here.
Welcome to We Just School here. This is our third episode in our Halloween event, and today we're doing something a little different. We're recording at the Downtown Salt Lake Library in downtown Salt Lake City, Utah. So if you can't tell, I'm a little nervous because, again, we're doing something a bit different. Today we have our first guest, and he's in studio with us. If you're a Coast to Coast fan or Mysterious Universe or just love a good ghost story, we have Paul Rimmasch. Did I pronounce your name right?
Yeah, perfect.
Awesome.
Perfect.
He
you
is...
get extra points for that.
Awesome. I'm also going to get extra points for pronouncing Weber correctly.
That's right.
That's right.
He is a veteran CSI investigator with the Ogden Metro Police?
Weber Metro.
Yeah. In northern Utah. If you think of the Salt Lake Valley as one giant stretch of freeway, he's at the very northern end, and right now we're in the middle. So
that's right.
It's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, you've got a couple cities on either end that cap it, but it's the longest stretch of continuously populated freeway in the country. Oh. So, yeah, come check it out. There's lots of McDonald's along the way. I like Ogden a lot. But
Ogden is a cool town. I mean, I actually grew up in Sandy, Midvale area.
Okay.
And went up to Ogden to go to Weber State because I wanted to study forensics, and they're the only ones who had a program in it.
And they've got one of the premier forensic schools in the Intermountain West.
Yes, they do. And so I actually adjunct teach up there a little bit on the side. I do the photography, crime scene photography and lab photography classes. And we have our students everywhere in the West. We have people placed everywhere. That sounds kind of just conspiratorial. Like we've got our people everywhere. But we have it's a
wildcats in every corner.
Yep, they're all. You never know when one's going to come around.
So today we're going to talk about a book that you wrote. It just came out in July, I believe.
Yes, that's correct.
Fingerprints and Phantoms: True Tales of Law Enforcement Encounters with the Paranormal and the Strange. So I know a lot of your background is with some treasure hunting fiction. What were some of the other books that you've...
So the two previous books that I've had published are, they're a series, the first one and the sequel, and they deal with treasure hunting and LDS fiction and Utah-related kind of history and things like that. And so this book is a radical departure from my first efforts.
I didn't have a chance to check out your other work, but if they're anything like this book, they're going to be a good read, whether you're familiar with LDS, Latter-day Saints, or for those of you not in Utah, Mormons, with any of the ideology or even some of the stories in that culture. They're going to be a good read, I can tell.
Thanks.
Can I ask if you've done LDS Storymakers, the conference?
I haven't. Oh. I was aware of it, and life is so busy sometimes. It was always hard to get and do some of that stuff.
I've only been to about half of the ones that I've since I've been aware of it, but it's a fun conference. It's a good place to make connections.
Yeah, I've heard it's really good. And the second book, I think maybe we should come back and do another episode about the second book because of my first two, because the second book deals with a really fascinating piece of history that most people don't know about, and that's the link between Utah and Montezuma's lost treasure. So when the Aztecs conquered when the Spanish conquered the Aztec Empire, the legends and stories say that a caravan of treasure and records and everything came north.
All of Montezuma's gold.
Yes, and the Spanish knew where it was. They saw some of it, and then it was gone. And where did it go?
They were interrupted, right? Because was it Coronado?
Yes, they
had
leave.
an opposing force show up on the shores of Mexico, and you had to go deal with them.
Yeah, and when they came back, it was gone.
I caught your interview with George.
Okay, great.
In May. On Coast to Coast AM. So
that's probably something for not.
That would be fun. I'm glad you're having a good enough time to want to come back. So.
Well, you guys, it's early.
Yeah.
My wife has the car running out.
She's just circling the lot.
Yeah, she's waiting.
And as always, I'm joined by Lisa. Lisa is back today.
Hello.
Welcome back, Lisa.
Thank you.
I gained a Lisa and lost a Nemo for this episode. But you know what? We've got Paul, and I've got a special bonus. Everyone's been asking for, and by everyone, I mean Lisa and my wife. Haley is back with us today. Haley, welcome back to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me back on.
I'm excited. Let's get into the book. Paul, what was your inspiration for writing this book?
Well, it's interesting because, like we talked about, this is a departure from my other writing projects.
Sure.
And where this really came from is that I love storytelling. So it's one of my favorite things ever since I was a small boy. I loved when my dad told me stories and my scoutmasters, and I've always just been a fan of the spoken word, just sitting down with somebody like we're doing right now and hearing stories. And as I got into my profession, into crime scene investigation, it's, on TV, there's always action and everybody's running around doing all this fun stuff. But in reality, there's a lot of downtime in police work. And a lot of that comes from, it's a hurry up and wait. Hey, there's a crime scene, everybody get here. But then we got to wait for the search warrant to be signed. So you wait 2 hours for them to find a judge to wake up. Or you're sitting over at court waiting to go on to testify, and there's all this downtime. So there's a tremendous amount of downtime in the business. And I noticed soon after I started in the career that was prime storytelling time. That as you're sitting there waiting, you're with your coworkers or other colleagues in the business, stories are going to be told.
Yeah.
And it's also a field where there's lots of stories to be told. There's lots of adventures that have happened or interesting cases or gross things that you've seen. There's always something to really talk about. And so it's one of the aspects of my job that I love is the storytelling part of it. And so where this book came from is that it was 1 October, as I was out on calls and out working with the guys, I just started to ask, hey, have you had any weird stuff that's happened to you, any ghost stories? And at first, people were a little hesitant to say, but when they saw that I was, serious, I wasn't there to make fun of them, people started to open up. And so that was kind of my tradition every Halloween, around Halloween, to talk to people. But then the thing that really got this whole project going is that something happened to one of my best friends, Mitch. And it's one of the stories in the book, and it was kind of patient zero for this project because it happened and it just opened my mind to a lot of possibilities of the crossover between paranormal and law enforcement.
Is Mitch the one who always would ask a victim what happened?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. It's like using a Ouija board. You're going to have, you never know what's going to latch onto you.
Right. And so do we want to talk about that story now?
Yeah.
Sure, go for
let's dive
it.
in.
Okay. So this really, like I said, this opened my eyes to so maybe there is this big connection between law enforcement and specifically forensics and the paranormal, because what happened was, to put it bluntly, a ghost followed Mitch home from a crime scene. And I'll get into the details here in a second, but what's interesting is it turns out that he's not alone. This is somewhat common as I've talked to people and people have heard about my book, that, as crime scene investigators, we're always paranoid about what we're dragging into our house on our shoes. Like,
Sure.
We go to some disgusting bloody scene or, something really horrible, and we put booties on or we take our shoes off. Or
Sounds like where we work. We work in a medical
we work in a
lab.
medical
So,
lab.
yeah.
yeah, we're always worried about what we're bringing home.
Right,
too, so.
right. It's something that crime scene people are obsessed with. And some people are even like germaphobes. And I'm like, how do you work in this job when you can,
Right.
you get freaked out by that? But that's a different story. But so, some people even pull their car into their garage, close the door, strip their clothes off, their work clothes and then go into the house and take a shower.
Mhm.
I have a detached garage, so I couldn't really get away with that. Or the
You
neighbors
could, but then your colleagues would be coming
Yeah,
over saying,
right.
Mitch, put on pants.
Yeah,
the neighbors called us again.
Yeah, the neighbors would be upset. But so anyway, so the story with Mitch is that one day we had a call of a homicide, and it was, all homicides are tragic, and it's one of those emotional trauma burden things that we have to deal with. And this one to me was particularly sad because it seemed like the ultimate betrayal. Because what had happened is, to back up a little bit, in my book, I don't go into a lot of details on the specifics of the crimes that I talk to. And so you love true crime books.
True.
And so I wouldn't classify this as a true crime because I don't go into the names and a lot of the details. And that's just, I want this book to be kind of fun.
I think you did a really good job of setting the scene without going into the gory details.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Okay. And I was curious to ask how your opinion as a true crime buff, how you liked it. We can talk about that in a minute. But anyway, so in this case, the cases I try to be vague enough because unfortunately these stories repeat themselves over and over again, that if you heard the story, you can't necessarily assume it's your cousin or somebody you knew. But that's just the thought process I had in writing it. But anyway, so we go to a homicide where a woman was kidnapped by her estranged husband from her place of employment. He took her at gunpoint and they drove off. And so her coworkers called the cops and they were looking, they knew where the truck was. Well, they found it at her parents' house. And what ensued was kind of a standoff, a little bit of a shootout with the police, but not too intense. But in the end, the perpetrator killed his estranged wife and his mother-in-law execution style. He had them confined in a closed space on chairs, and he just stood over them and shot them. And
Awful.
the dad was able to escape in kind of a shootout with the police. And it was awful because these people, I always thought, who had to watch? Did a mother watch her daughter get killed or a daughter get her mother killed? Both of them were horrible.
Yeah.
It's a horrible situation. But anyway, so as we get in there and we're working the scene, at some point, Mitch is alone with the victims. And it happens. I mean, we go in as a team, but there's ebb and flow that, there's different responsibilities. You might be taking the photographs while someone else is counting bullet holes or fingerprinting or something. And so, you're sometimes together with your team and sometimes you're not. And due to the ebb and flow, I can't remember the details, who was doing what, but at some point, Mitch is alone with the victims. And he kneels down. He was kind of a young investigator at this time. Now he's leading his own forensic unit here in northern Utah as well.
Wow.
He's a great crime scene investigator.
Congrats, Mitch.
Yeah, he's awesome. And I'm so glad he lets me drag his name through the mud. Because everyone wants to hear about Mitch. But anyway, so he is alone with the bodies. He kneels down in front of the younger of the victims, and just as a mental exercise, okay? Like, he's not really asking, and he doesn't expect a response, but as a mental exercise, he says, "Tell me what happened to you." Mm-hmm. And as soon as he does that, the lights go out. It just completely dark in there. And so he's alone in this room with two corpses, essentially. And that can be disconcerting, and Mitch felt a little anxious. And after a moment, and he doesn't know how long, it could have been 5 seconds, it could have been 30 seconds, but it wasn't, minutes, After a moment, the lights pop back on, and he's like, "Oh, okay, that was weird." So he comes out and he finds us, and we're on the street corner, and knowing me, I would have been like grabbing a Dr. Pepper or something at that point. "Oh, Mitch, you're the young guy, you go do it." But, we're out there, and he comes out and says, "Hey, did you guys notice the lights go out here?" And, we're standing there, street lights, other houses and everything, and we're like, "No, we didn't even see anything go on." So he's like, "Okay, all right." And then he shakes it off and goes on, and we do the call, and And we were there for a couple days. It wasn't a huge scene, but there was a lot of stuff to do. And so we were there for a couple days, and then we move on to the next horrible thing. Well, Mitch, however, started to experience some weird things going on in his home after this. And at first, he's not really putting it all together. So what he starts to notice are certain electrical anomalies going on in his house. So say the power in one room is out. The rest of the house is fine. Power in one room's out. Checks the circuit breaker.
That sounds like my house.
Nothing's wrong. Oh, what do you got?
What'd you take home?
You've said you thought your dad was haunting you.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he is.
Your dad? Well,
Yeah.
Yeah, didn't he electrocute you once?
No, that was my cousins.
Oh, okay,
yeah,
never
my
mind.
cousins are the ones who electrocuted me. Jerks.
Never mind. Sorry.
what are cousins for, right?
Right? Torturing the youngest. That's what
Oh,
they're
that's
for.
true. That's true. The youngest gets picked on. But anyway, so yeah, there would be electrical anomalies in one room. Circuit breaker's fine. Nothing. Then one day he would show up late to work, and we were razzing him, and he's like, I don't know. I set my alarm clock. Everything's fine. And I wake up in the morning and it's blinking. Everything else in the room was fine. Just the alarm clock wasn't working. So he started to notice just these weird things. Well, about the same time, his dog started to act very strangely.
And this is the pug, right?
Yes, and there's a picture of him in the front of the book because unfortunately he's gone to doggy heaven now. And
Cross the rainbow bridge.
yeah, and it was sad. Mitch was very close to this dog, and the dog was hilarious. But the dog's name is the Dude. And pugs are a eccentric breed.
Sure.
But this dog started to act very strangely. Now, one of the things that he started to do was that he would be sitting in a room with Mitch. They were alone, and the dog would start to look up, and his eyes would be following something walking around, as if that something were walking around the room. But there's nothing there. And it would look up in the corner like something was floating, and the dog just would do that all the time. And Mitch would start to feel a little like, what's going on here? This is really weird, because he wasn't just aimlessly looking. His eyes were tracking something. And then, for some reason, the dog became obsessed and psychotic almost about the upstairs bathroom. That when Mitch would go up to that bathroom, he would run in there, wouldn't want him to be in there, would bark and run around, and was just acting strange. And so at no time did Mitch really put all this together, but he was just starting to notice this cumulative, like, what is going on here?
Things are getting weird.
Yeah, things are getting weird here. Well, what broke the case, as it were, is Mitch started to date a new young lady, and she came over to his house for the first time, and she was an intuitive. For her, the veil was thin. And so as soon as she got there, she's like, oh, okay, Mitch, I hate to say this, but you've got a ghost in your house. And Mitch is like, oh, man, I haven't even been here a couple of years. And it was a new build, too. And so he's just like, okay, what's going on? So they talk about it, and through the process of the elimination, just asking questions, his new girlfriend nailed it. Got it to the point that they figured out that it was this girl who Mitch had kneeled before and at the crime scene and asked her, tell me what happened to you. And at that point, for whatever reason, she connected to him and attached to him and followed him home and stayed there. I mean, once he figured out what was going on, he wasn't really that weirded out anymore. It wasn't this horrible, Amityville horror haunting where flies are coming out of the walls or whatever. It was the weird things would happen. And he got to live with it, he got to accept it, and he eventually moved out of the house. But when we all figured out, when we were talking about this story, like I said, I'd love to hear these ghostly stories over the years, but it really kind of crystallized it in my mind that, like, wait a minute, because we deal with death and misery and all these things on such a close proximity, there can be this blowback on us. And so that story was the first one that I put, typed into a computer, and it was the kind of the genesis for the book. So, if we go back to the question, what prompted me to write this book, It was my love of storytelling, and then that first story that happened to Mitch just really got me interested.
Mitch shows up a couple times in the book. And
He does.
Mitch has adventures with the paranormal. So
Mitch has lots of adventures. I could write a book probably just about Mitch.
I think you should.
I probably should.
So I hate to ask the boring, obvious questions, but that don't really necessarily pertain to the book. But you said how you have to deal with all the like death and the misery and see all these horrible things, and I think it really takes a special person to be able to handle that kind of thing. And like, was that something that you always wanted to do? Like, how did you get into what you do? Or
That is an interesting question. So when I was in high school, I wanted to be an archaeologist. I always loved kind
I
of
feel that on a spiritual level.
Yes. And that's, if you read my first two fiction books, you can see
Right,
my
that's
love and interest in ancient
right there.
cultures,
Yes.
and kind of putting things back together. And later, it was actually I served an LDS mission, and one of my good friends, one of my mission buddies, his dad was in the FBI, and I had never really considered law enforcement before, but once again, when his name's Paul too, when Paul would tell me some of the stories, I love stories about his dad, I was like, I've never considered law enforcement before. That'd be interesting, but I wasn't that interested in the kicking down of doors and the toting of guns and all that. I mean,
Yeah.
and so, but
Yeah.
but I was thinking of law enforcement. Then another one of my mission friends, Scott, his dad was in forensics, and so when he told stories of what his dad did, that was like, oh, that's what I want to do.
I get
awesome.
best of both worlds.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
you can be in there and you can make a difference. And I guess my mom, when I was young, she loved the show Quincy MD. I don't know if you guys remember that show.
Yes.
Yeah, with Jack Klugman. And so that, I probably had it in the back of my brain, that kind of stuff too. And so that's just really what I wanted to do that. And so when I got home from my mission, that's when I was like, okay, where do I go and study this? And like, up Ogden, they have Weber State. And so that's when I went up to Ogden, and I'm kind of stuck there. But it's a very important question that you ask about the emotional toll, because I was asked to speak at a forensics conference in Las Vegas in April, like it was, this spring sometime, and I actually did a presentation on mental health aspects for CSIs, because we're kind of in this weird no man's land, because there's been a lot of studies done on kind of the acute stress, the fight or flight, immediate danger stress that officers and soldiers and stuff face.
First responders.
Yeah, like immediately my life's in danger, or this person's bleeding out, or somebody's shooting at me. There's been a lot of study on that. We in forensics have kind of a different, more chronic stress. And so the best example, I was fortunately out of town when this happened. I'm glad I missed this one. But up in one of our cities that we deal with, there was a homicide suicide where a father had killed his wife and small children and then himself. And a horrible scene, small children killed and with a gun. And the officers that responded there obviously had the horror of finding it. And it's very shocking. Well, they were able to be sent home to kind of decompress after what they saw. But when CSI gets there, it's like, all right, CSI, you get in there and look at those same kids for the next 5 to 10 hours.
Yeah, that's
And-
the thing is like it's a
and good
very
luck.
Secure the scene.
have to know.
time-consuming
Yeah.
process to
Right.
make sure you're not missing anything and to go over everything.
Close
and it's
study.
like, yeah,
Yeah, so
you're up in it. You're not just happening upon it. You have to get in it. And
Right.
yeah,
and that's totally it. It's like, it's not acute stress. Like I know there's a dead kid in there, so there's not going to be this shock to me to find it, but I have to look at that dead kid or whatever for hours and hours. And it really came to kind of a head in our unit. Is, I don't know if you guys remember, several years back there was a mass police shooting in Ogden where an officer actually was killed and
Yes.
multiple officers injured. And so we spent 2.5 months putting that whole scene back together, that house. Like we were there almost every working day for at least 2 hours. Like we had other stuff that we had to deal with, but we spent tons of time in that house. And it became so oppressive just going back there day after day, week after week.
Very personal, I'm sure, because
Yes.
I'm sure you worked with
Right.
some of the people involved.
Exactly. And stepping over their blood, looking at the spot where they went down, and knowing also, I mean, we consider the defendant too. I mean, as forensics people, I don't work technically for the police or the prosecutor. I work for the truth. And so we're trying to ferret out what happened, and we're trying to be fair to the shooter and the defendant, and so we just have this weird middle ground. And so after we were done with that scene, we had a lot of mental health problems in our unit. There was marriages that were lost, there was different things, and so finally the administration's like, oh, I guess CSI is kind of different, and so, I mean, it's just, and I'm not being critical of the administration, it's just because there's not a lot of research on it. Like there's a lot of research on cops, but there's not a lot of research on forensic people. So,
It doesn't seem obvious.
right. Yeah, and they've done their best. They've, since then, our administration has done a great job of making sure we get the help we need and to do their best in that regard. But it's kind of a burgeoning area of research. It's like, how is chronic stress different than acute stress? But kind of back to your question, 7 years in my experience is kind of the make or break point. Like when people first get into this business, it's fun, it's exciting. You get instant credibility when you tell someone at a party, like, hey, I'm CSI. Oh, you are. Everybody loves it. But about that 7-year mark, the newness is wearing off. Cynicism can be setting in. You start to have that emotional
Burnout.
Yeah, burnout. And so 7 to 10 years is where a lot of people will burn out. And so I guess I'm double that.
You're coming on 2 decades.
Yeah, I have 21 years I just hit in July. So, it's
So you must be a really special person.
or I don't know. I'm not good at anything else. That's my problem. What else could I do? Nah, nothing really.
I think, in the book you point out how early in your career you would, when you're driving around the city, you'd point out, oh, I was here, all these sites to your wife and tell her what happened. And, she's got to be a hero in this story too, because you mentioned, marriages were lost over the stress from the officer shooting up in Ogden, and to put up with that for 20 years.
Yeah, she has 2 great attributes for a CSI's wife. It's really funny. I always tease her about it. One is that she can sleep through most things. So all those years when I get called out of bed and have to go off and do something, most of the time in the morning she'll be like, hey, at least you didn't get called out last night. And I'm like, well, actually,
I got home 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, so she's really good at that. And then she's a great listener, but she has like a flush button in her brain. So like she's listening and she'll ask questions and she'll talk. But then if you were to ask her like a week later what I told her about, she'd like, oh, I can't remember.
So she's not internalizing your stuff.
Oh, no. Yeah.
constantly.
She's and it's not like she's not listening.
Yeah,
like
right,
she is.
right.
And we'll talk about it, and she's very supportive. But she doesn't carry internalize. That's a great way to put it.
That's wonderful.
She just kind of goes.
Sounds like a great match.
Yeah, it works great.
One of the things that you wrote, and I don't know why this particular line stood out to me so much in the book, but I think it's chapter 6, and you're talking about how different the life of a CSI is, and you were talking about Christmas, and while the rest of Christendom was enjoying the holiday with family, friends, and delicious food, I was lying on cold, hard ground with my head in a pool of ice water, trying to fish a used condom out from under a tough shed with a hockey stick. You say such a Yuletide scene is not to be immortalized, but I kind of feel like we need to come up with a line of Christmas cards for CSIs.
Yes.
Yes, and that actually happened. That's not hyperbole. That actually happened.
Just reading it, the way that you wrote the book, I feel like you don't ever get the idea that anything in this book is fabricated. everything in this book comes off is very genuine.
Thank you.
And living in the Salt Lake Valley for the last, I guess, almost 13 years now, the locations that you talk about, I can visualize a lot of those, and I've been to a lot of those. Like right now in downtown Salt Lake, we're across from the old county building, and in here you have a great story about security officers. A lot of police officers, or you mentioned, are security officers first, then police officers, and then they retire and they end up back as security officers. To end
the
up
circle of
careers.
life.
Yeah. And, just when I was reading that chapter, knowing, sitting down in front of that building, drinking a beer during the Arts Fest, or, I can picture these places that you're mentioning in the book, and it was kind of fun. Like, I don't think I've read a book, about Utah that I've been able to visualize the locations as much as with how you've written them here. So.
Well, thanks. Yeah, and it's all, there's a few stories that come from different areas where officers worked elsewhere and came, but most of them are just right here in northern Utah. So
I really love that story as well about the Salt Lake County building, because my grandpa actually helped design and build that building.
Oh, really? It's a beautiful building.
So I know every time I drive past it, I think of him. May he be resting in peace. But I just love that, and the fact that it's probably haunted just makes me giddy inside.
Well, it's funny that a book like this and stories like this are infectious. They breed other stories.
Sure.
And so, since this has come out, I was down in my old neighborhood and ran into where I grew up, and ran into one of my old friends, and he is currently a security guard at the county building. He's like, dude, I read your book. That happens. And then he told me some stories that happened to him, and they've seen things, stuff has moved around. Like, he told me a story where there's doors up on a balcony or something, and they're supposed to be closed and locked, and then close and lock them, but then they would be open again, and he would lock them, and then they would be open again, and then there was even a potted tree that was slid in front of it, and so that building must have a lot going on in there.
Maybe it's my grandpa.
Maybe he's like, you better take care of this building I designed.
I hope so.
Well, I think one of the most interesting stories, I think, in the book for me is the fact that I appear to be haunting my own lab, my own office. And I'll just tell the story real quick. I've had multiple coworkers who at different times have thought I was in the building, but I was not. And so the first one I'd heard about, it was one of my coworkers named Angie, and she was back in our records room, and it's kind of the furthest part away from the more populated where everyone's offices are. It's kind of through the lab and almost at the very end of our building. And she was in there one night at 2 a.m. putting some files away, and clear as day behind her, she hears my voice say, Angie. And it's so recognizable for her, it's so clear that she's not frightened at all. She's like, oh, Paul's not supposed to be here. He's off, but maybe he came in, because we'll swing by the office. Sure. Stuff that we forgot, and we love our coworkers, so it's sometimes you just go and hang out. And so she turns around, and I'm nowhere to be found. So she walks out, she looks around, starts, Polly, and she goes out and looks in the driveway. My car's not there, and at that point, she gets scared and just drives around the rest of her shift. She doesn't want to come back. Similar thing happened to another one of my coworkers, Shanae. She was in the lab. She hears me come in, say her name, and she goes out and looks for me. Nothing. Another one of my coworkers hears me sneeze. I have a really distinctive sneeze. Got it from my dad.
You a scream sneezer?
Well, it's more like, I don't know. It's hard to say.
I sneeze like an elephant, so I
don't want to embarrass myself here in front of our listeners. But.
That's what this podcast is.
Okay.
No, that's for us to embarrass ourselves.
Oh, sorry, not our
embarrass
guests.
our guests.
Yeah, not our guests. Sorry.
Since I'm the first guest, maybe I'll be the last one if I embarrass. But
word gets around.
Yeah. So, but anyway, she looks out in the office, nothing. And so you talk about your grandpa and the building and everything, and it's just really opened up the possibility to me, like, not all hauntings or ghostly experiences, I don't think, are alike. So, I mean, I think some are a vengeful spirit or, something like that. But are a lot of hauntings a piece or a moment in time that's recorded or trapped somehow? And, I'm
On
not
a
dead.
quantum loop.
Yeah, like a loop in time or a hiccup in time or energy.
Yeah, I would say even like an energy echo, just because
Right.
that's a place that you've clearly spent a lot of time and put yourself
Yeah.
into
And
the
also-
environment a lot.
You have from what I get from the book and just our conversation today, you have a very positive energy about you, and a very positive energy can be absorbed by a place.
Right.
You walk into a place, you get a bad feeling,
Yeah, positive
or you
or
can
negative,
walk,
yeah.
you can walk into a place and feel really good about it and just feel at ease and feel comfortable, and the rapport that you are able to have with your coworkers just to get them to open up about some of their experiences, I think is proof enough that you have that type of energy about you.
Yeah, and what mechanism records that? I don't know. It's fascinating, and I have no answers.
It's your microscope. You're haunting your microscope.
Okay, well, I know you guys all want to talk about, quantum loops and energy, but I'm going to ask the obvious question that I know everyone is thinking it, but no one wants to say it. Is it possible that you were a twin at birth and your twin died?
Way to bring up a touchy subject.
This is obvious for Haley.
In a world of infinite possibilities, yes, that is very possible.
And your parents just didn't tell you, they didn't want to break your heart?
Yeah, maybe. And yeah, who knows? And I've even had people, when I've done some other podcasts and radio shows and tell that story, they've reached out and said, maybe it's a demon like mimicking you or something. And, I don't know. It's hard to say. I think that would have left like a more
Yeah, it
negative
seems like your
feeling,
coworkers
but-
weren't uncomfortable with it. So
Yeah. So I don't know. It's interesting. It opens up for me a lot of possibilities. Because what's funny is when it comes down to it, I'm kind of a healthy skeptic about a lot of this stuff. And because like our building that we work in it has this metal roof and it's really noisy. Like when the heats and cools, it pops. There's circuit breakers that go off. I mean, it's kind of a noisy building. People are like, did you hear that? That's a ghost. And I'm like, no, that was just so like I don't just automatically jump to every conclusion. Like if someone tells me something, I'm like, oh yeah. It's like I'm kind of skeptical, but I think the word skeptic has been kind of twisted in the public discourse that we have now. Like the word skeptic seems to mean hater. Like
it's a dirty
Right.
word, like conspiracy theorist has
Right.
become a dirty word, something that someone can throw around. Or skeptic is the same thing on the opposite end of that spectrum.
Yeah, so I don't think a skeptic is a hater. A skeptic is someone who's not just going to be gullible and believe everything that they hear.
right.
And so, I mean, every story I put in there, I feel that the people who told it to me were being straight with me. I just didn't, I need another 10 pages. Let's throw some crap in there. I mean, it's like everybody who told me stuff that ended up in the book, I thought, this seems credible to me. And they seem earnest and I don't know, like I think you have to be a little bit skeptical on a lot of these things because there are people out there who will try to fool you and do different things. But
Even as someone who I would definitely call myself a skeptic, I was raised very religious, but now I'm not religious at all. I would consider myself more agnostic atheist. I still really enjoyed the book. I still think I'm still open to the possibility of there being an afterlife and there being energy and spirits and ghosts and things like that. I'm not completely closed off, but I am very skeptical. But there were a couple stories in there that still gave me that kind of spooky feeling. And that doesn't really happen a lot with me. Like you said, like having that noisy building. I live in a house that was built in the 30s from an old chicken. It was originally an old chicken coop that they added onto. And so it's just very...
All those poor eggs haunting you.
haunted by all the chicken periods. And so there's a lot of creaking that happens. There's not a lot of insulation in the walls, so we have a really big elm tree in our backyard that creaks and sways and brushes its branches against the house and across the roof and whatever. And so things that go bump in the night aren't really what scares me. I think that's a big part of the reason why I love true crime so much. It's because it's like the real things that can hurt you are like other people. And so it's like I don't really revel in the like gory details, which is one thing that I appreciated about your book specifically, is it doesn't really go into the specifics of the crime scene. But it's just, gosh, what am I trying to say? You're going to have to edit this because I'm on a rant. And now I lost my train of thought.
Everybody should buy it. That's what you're trying
I love the book. Everybody should buy it.
There we go.
Yeah, I kind of lost my train of thought there.
If I may kind of carry on with what I think you're trying to say, is that, so I've gotten the question before, and your position as an agnostic, I think you might be someone who would ask this question. Okay, Paul, you're in a business that deals with fact and science and law. How is it that you're writing this book about ghost stories? And is it appropriate even for you to be dealing with some subjects like this when, in a couple days from now, you could be in a court of law and the jury is asked to believe you? Is it appropriate for you to be dealing with this? And so my answer to this, and I think it goes along with maybe your point of view, is that there are certain stories that I've heard and dealt with in this book that I can't just dismiss out of hand. And so people are experiencing something, okay? From the beginning of the written word and the spoken word, people have talked about ghost stories and spiritual things and different encounters. And, even when you go into subjects like UFO or Bigfoot or things that, people might think are really out there, because, ghost stories are still close enough to religion at times that people aren't too uncomfortable with them. But if you go to some of these other topics like UFOs, Bigfoot, whatever, cryptids, people are seeing something. Now, a certain percentage of those experiences, whether they're ghosts or Bigfoot or whatever, you could dismiss with, the misidentification, or this person's lying, or something. You could dismiss a part of those. Another part of those, you could say, well, this person's suffering maybe some mental problems, some schizophrenia, hallucinations. You could dismiss a part of that. But there is always a portion of the stories that you hear that you can't just dismiss. And who am I to do that? And I've explained a few times in some of the other realms, as a crime scene investigator, we're taught to think a little bit different than kind of the average scientific method. And so the average scientific method, or the scientific method they teach kids in school, is that you should have a theory. And then once you have your theory, you do some experimentation to prove or disprove that theory. And then in the end, you will have truth. You've either said, yes, this theory is good, or no, this theory is bad. And that's fine. That's a great way of looking at things. But as a forensic investigator, as a detective or crime scene investigator, you should not have a theory going into your crime scene. You shouldn't go in with some preconceived thought, okay, this is what happened. And my mentor, the guy who taught me how to think, brought me up in the business, his name's Russ. He's one of the professors up at Weber State, one of the main professors. He still teaches up there. He taught me to think from a bottom-up approach, where when you go into a scene and you see the bodies, you see the evidence, you don't instantly say, oh, this is what happened. You look and you start to analyze events, small events at a time. Okay, this little thing happened, and we're pretty sure about that. Okay, let's connect that little event with this little event, and you start from the bottom up. And as you build, then you can kind of have a working theory that you might banter around, but you're not tied to it at all. You'll jettison that working theory at a moment's notice.
As soon as the evidence shows you something different.
Yeah, you are not anchored to that theory at all. And then as you build and build and build, then at the end, when everything has been analyzed, when all the events are pieced together, then you present what you think happened. That's your reconstruction of it. And Russ was amazing. He's retired now from scene work, and He's still amazing, but when we worked scenes together, he was amazing in the fact that the dude was never wrong. Like, he didn't go in and talk a lot. He just observed. Then at the end, what he said was what happened. And it was amazing. And so I've approached some of these, the paranormal stories, gathering these stories from that same approach. Like, I'm not just going to say, nope, ghosts don't exist, and you're going to have to disprove that theory. I'm like, okay, what's going on here? So somebody's experiencing something. And okay, like I said, some of these things, it's a creaky building. Some of these things, you've been hitting the sauce, or you need to go see your psychologist or whatever. But there's a certain percentage of those stories that you can't dismiss. And then, so what do you do?
Yeah,
Right.
That's such a great answer. Thank you for getting there when I couldn't.
Okay, was that kind of where we're going?
Kind of.
Well, and I think another part of what you were saying is, for you, like for someone who might have religion, a ghost story to them might be scary.
Yeah.
For you, the true crime is your horror story.
Mm-hmm.
So, going to see it wouldn't necessarily scare you, but going to see a movie about, the Night Stalker would
Absolutely.
Yeah.
would be your idea.
That would be my worst nightmare.
But then
Well,
there's,
and no, truth is stranger than fiction. I mean, what the humans do to other humans is more horrible than.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, and that's the thing is, like, it's like I'm not into true crime for the gory details. I'm into true crime because it's like, what makes this person tick? Why did they do this? What's the nature versus nurture behind it? Like, and all that kind of stuff. Like, that's what interests me about true crime, not necessarily like the horrific things that happen. It's just like the why and the how.
and then you get to things
This
like
happens.
this, and it's like, well, there's these credible things coming from credible people.
Yeah.
And how do you not
Yeah.
just
Well,
say,
and I've
no,
had-
that's not going to
My thing is
be something I believe.
I consider myself an agnostic atheist, so I think that I'm open to the possibility of things. I just think that no one can know for sure. So I'm not going to say there is no this, there is no that. It's just like, I don't know, but
Right.
I think probably not. But there have been things that I've experienced in my life and in my family home that I can't explain, that are supernatural. And so I haven't completely shut that off. I mean, if those things, my thing is I don't fear any of those interactions that I had, because none of them seemed hostile or dangerous or left me with like I had like ooh, that was freaky, but I
Right.
wasn't left feeling like I was in danger or any harm was going to come to me or anything like that. So
Well, but
I don't know.
see, your approach to it is extremely healthy, because there are people out there who, because of their belief system, and a lot of times it does come from that top-down scientific method approach. That if you have that first theory that there are no ghosts, or there's no Bigfoot, or there's no UFOs, or whatever, the trouble with
I've seen a UFO
Have you? Oh, that sounds like another show.
in Bountiful.
The trouble with that top-down approach is that sometimes a thing called anchoring can occur, or anchoring bias.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That if your original theory is you feel that you've proven that, and then you've written your thesis on it, and you've made your career putting forth that if other evidence comes along that tends to disprove it, you're not going to listen to that. You are anchored to that first premise, or that first thesis.
Absolutely.
And so the bottom-up approach that we try to have in forensics, you never become anchored really to anything until you've looked at all you could possibly look. And then you still have to have that intellectual honesty that if something else comes along that disproves it, out the window it goes. And anchoring is still a problem that all humans have, I think, but
Sure.
in our line of work, we can't afford it. I mean, we are obligated, if we're doing an investigation, we find some exculpatory evidence that proves that the defendant is innocent, we have to turn it over.
Right.
Like there's no, well, we think we're pretty sure he's guilty, or he's guilty of something, so let's hide this fact that the fingerprint doesn't match it. We can't do that. I wouldn't do it. I would rather mean, my biggest fear is to do something like that, to send some innocent person to jail. I would
Right.
not want that on my conscience. I have enough baggage. So we can't afford to anchor. If we have any exculpatory evidence, defense, here you go. That's just the way it is. And so I think your approach of like, I don't necessarily believe this. This is not part of my belief system, but I'm not going to discount it. That's the healthy approach. And I think if everybody had more of that approach, I think we would get at more truth, because people do.
I'm perfect. What can I say?
Well, it's a burden, right?
A blessing and a curse.
All your friends hate you behind your back because you're perfect.
No. I love you so much. You're so pretty.
No, Josh hates me to my face.
Yeah. We balance each other
That's
out.
true love, right there.
Aw, buddy, I love you.
I love you too.
And that's not to say there aren't some things in this book that weren't a little, not necessarily stomach churning, but made you go, ew. Things that make you go, ew.
Oh, there was definitely one that made me almost gag a little.
The one with the mold.
The one with the mold.
I think that was like my favorite segment of the whole book, and it was one that was
such a great
involved
story.
you personally.
That was one that made my skin crawl.
Yeah, you should have been there.
No.
Talking about how disgusting some of the crime scenes can be. Laying on the cold ground, fishing out something with a hockey stick on Christmas is one thing, but having to go into some situations where the body hasn't been found for a while, and mold has grown and may not smell the best. There may be strange liquids on the ground. I think that one was the one. For me, it wasn't necessarily like a ghost story. And I'm going to let our listeners read the book and I can't remember what chapter it is. I had notes and I got them on my phone, which is also recording.
It's in like the mold one?
Yeah.
It's in like the first third.
Okay.
I can't remember what chapters either, because they shuffled them after I wrote them.
It flows really well. But
that's great.
That's my copy editor, Christine. Thank you, Christine.
Thanks, Christine. It's a great read.
But I go in and it's you personally experienced this, and the end of the segment in the book, you talk about the strange coincidence, and it gave me chills. Out of everything that you talked about in the book, that one is the one that gave me chills. So when you pick up the book, when you get to the chapter of the mold, that's the one we're talking about. You'll know which one we're talking about.
You
right
kids.
now.
Chapter's called The Note.
That's it. Yes.
The Note.
Yes, The Note. And yeah, you're gonna love it. Pick up the book, but that chapter is gonna give you chills. So,
well, I guess the book's already written; it's too late. But what did you guys think of my style of having the first part of the chapter be kind of a segue talking about CSI life or law enforcement life, and then having a transition into the
thought it
ghost
was
story?
fantastic.
I loved it. It kind of gives you, it like sets you up for the story, and it kind of gives you a little, because I'm sure everybody wonders like, what's a day in the life of a CSI?
A real CSI, not a TV CSI.
Yeah, not CSI like Miami.
Hopefully, by now most people know that that's not how it really is.
There's still the CSI effect.
Yes.
Yeah.
Have you heard of the CSI effect?
Yes.
Yeah. So they still prosecutors still worry about that a lot.
Yeah. No, I really did love it, and it's kind of gives you like a sneak peek into like what it's like, what the thought process is, what they deal with.
Because I struggled, like when I first started out, I thought I wrote a few chapters in that format, and I don't even remember what my thought process was at the time, having kind of both. And maybe it's just, hey, people like ghosts and people like CSI, so let's, and I thought, how's this going to work? And so I had a couple trusted friends read it, and in the front of the book, I give a shout out to Katie. She really kept this project going along, because every few months she'd be like, have you got a new chapter? Have you got a new chapter? I'm going to come over to your house. A new chapter. So I kept it going. But she said, no, love it. And so I thought, all right, let's just go for it. And so I wasn't sure, but I'm glad you guys liked it.
So many books like this where they're recounting, stories and taking those oral traditions and putting them on paper. It's really easy to start out with, it was a dark and stormy night and my buddy was on patrol. But the way that you do it, where you explain the life of a CSI or the techniques of a CSI and work that into the story and how the event unfolded for the individual, I think that was perfect.
It's really unique.
I think that is one of the many things that sets your book apart from other ghost stories.
I have to say, I have not read your book yet. I really wanted to, but I had a death in my family and a lot of things that
Life got in the way.
kind
you
of
say?
turned upside down.
Right.
But just from listening to you guys talk about it, like my two of my favorite shows growing up were Crossing Jordan and Medium. And Crossing Jordan is about a oh my gosh, I just lost the word for it.
Medium?
No. Oh my goodness. I'm gonna feel really dumb.
Wasn't it? She was in forensics.
She was oh my gosh. She was a mortician.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I was like, I
Yes,
know.
I
the word, but yeah.
And then Medium, she was. It's actually a fictionalized story of a intuitive woman that works with the Phoenix Police Department. So this just I want to read every word of this. I'm really
Sounds
excited.
like both.
Yeah.
No, like the whole when you reached out to me, I was like, why is he reaching out to us? You know, and I'm really, really glad that you did. I never would have found the book otherwise. I probably would have heard one of your interviews on Coast or Mysterious Universe and gone, oh, that sounds really fun. And I'd listen to the interview and then I'd forget to get the book. I always forget to get the book. Hopefully none of you listeners forget to get this book. It's available on Amazon. Is it available at any of the national booksellers?
Yeah, Barnes and Noble's
Barnes
has
and
it.
Noble?
So
Okay.
a lot of Barnes and Nobles have it on the shelf. I was up in Portland for a meeting and went to a Barnes and Noble in Clackamas, and they had it. So yeah.
And you just grabbed it off the shelf and signed it and put it back.
Well, I front
Oh,
faced
Barnes
it.
and Noble.
Like, it was in the side, so I put it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the way to do it.
Got to get your shelf space somehow.
Every time you go to a Barnes & Noble and you find this book, front face it and make it prominent. So if
And
you've
just one more
already
time.
purchased it for yourself, pick up Fingerprints and Phantoms, True Tales of Law Enforcement Encounters with the Paranormal and the Strange. There's so many things that we could talk about. It's not an incredibly long book, so I don't want to give too much of it away. I want our readers or listeners to go out and read the book. But yeah, there's so much in this book that we could do 3 hours. I know, when you're on Coast, you do a 2-hour interview with George, and it never seems like it's long enough. I always sit there and go, I want more. But that's what the book's for.
Yeah,
so,
it goes quick.
Yeah.
Well, and speaking of more, you said, as you have said, these stories have a tendency to multiply. Do you think that you're going to be revisiting this?
I will, for sure. The publishing business is tricky.
Sure.
Depending on how well this does,
Yeah.
Schiffer Publishing will want a sequel or not. But I for sure will end up writing more down one day. Right now I'm busy furthering my education, so all I do is write non-film stuff right now.
And you're going for a master's in criminal justice?
Yes, up at Weber State. So I'm
Brave.
it's a lot of work.
The Wildcats.
I do tons of writing, but none of it's about ghosts.
Yeah.
None of it's that fun.
I think that you could find a way to make a term paper really interesting.
Well,
It could stand out.
we could turn a phrase pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, and that's an interesting question that are there more stories?
Mm-hmm.
It's funny. We kind of alluded about it at the beginning that people in my profession were a little bit hesitant to share at first.
It's like an airline pilot saying, I saw a UFO.
Exactly. Well,
It could end your career.
You've got credibility issues.
That's a perfect example. And it was funny, a few years ago, a few Octobers ago, we had kind of a tri-state forensics conference up in Ogden. And our agency was one of the hosts. And as part of it, we had a banquet at Jeremiah's restaurant. Have you ever been to Jeremiah's?
Yes.
Oh, great breakfast. That's
Pancakes the size of Josh.
Enough Bisquick in the state.
Yeah, Jeremiah's is awesome. We had our banquet there, and because it was around Halloween, the people who organized it, the book hadn't come out yet, but they knew that it was in kind of the hopper. And so they asked me if I would come. It's kind of a fun Halloween thing and tell some of the stories. And so I did. And for the forensics people, I actually went into a little bit more detail on the case. Not too much, but a little bit more. Made it kind of a case study, but then told the stories. And then after they opened it up, they had an open mic session where they said, hey, has anyone else had anything else that happened weird to them? And it was crickets. Like nobody said anything. And so they're like, okay, well, we'll close down and go back to dinner. And so they did. Well, because I've been at Weber State for so long and had so many students and interns and everything go out, like the forensics community, especially in Utah, is really close. Like I know almost everybody. And so, after I got done with my spiel, I went and kind of worked the tables just to greet everybody and talk. And it was funny, once I got to the individual table level, when there was just a few people that I was comfortable with, every single table had a story. Like I could have written a quarter of a new book just with the stories that I got talking to people. And so it's my experience that a lot of people in this profession have had stuff like this happen to them.
Well, and I think
it makes sense.
You mentioned in the book, you spent a lot of time alone in, in not just the CSI role, but in the law enforcement side of it, the police officers, waiting for the call or finishing out your shift, doing paperwork, finding a secluded area. And yeah, you're bound to see some things.
Well, especially, like you say, you are dealing with death in a really close proximity and things like that. But it's not just that. It's also that this type of work attracts people who are paying attention to their surroundings, paying attention to what's going on around them. And I think that makes sense that some of them notice things happening.
That's your job. You're supposed to see what everyone else misses.
Well, and officers especially need to be hyper-vigilant for their own safety. Especially nowadays, it seems like they have a target on their back, and there's assassinations and everything. And so they are hyper-vigilant. And it's this combination of dealing with trauma, dealing with death, being alone, being out late at night, being hyper-vigilant. These things do happen. But it's interesting. I think a lot of, we've talked about some of these subjects already, but, a lot of people in the profession are like, no, we deal with fact and we deal with law. What are people going to think? Yeah. And so as soon as they know that I'm serious and not going to make fun of them, and, I tell them a few stories. Sometimes you have to kind of prime the pump a little, but then the stories seem to flow. But then there's other officers. One of them I talk about in my book. There's a famous ghost in the Ogden City Cemetery called Flo. And that's where all the high school kids go with their girlfriends to scare them. Down here, it's Emo's grave. And so Flo is the Emo's grave of Ogden. And so supposedly there's this tombstone, and if you do some certain things, then Flo will appear. And lots of officers have seen Flo, but one of them I talked to, and I won't kind of ruin the punchline of the chapter in the book, but he's a total skeptic. Even though he experienced something that most other people would have seen as, a manifestation, he was like, well, I don't believe in ghosts. And so I think when I was on Midnight in the Desert with Dave Schrader, I had a cop from New York instant message me on Facebook, or maybe he messaged Dave, but I can't remember. But anyway, he kept saying, no, nobody I know has ever had a ghost story. I've been a cop for 30 years in New York, and I've never seen anything. And it's like, well, maybe
you work in a very boring precinct.
Yeah, and I don't doubt him. I don't doubt him in his word. And I think there is such a thing, is that some people are more prone to stuff happening to them.
Sure.
And, there's some people in my book that appear multiple times, like Mitch, and Shanae appears a few times. And it's like certain people, I think, either the veil is thinner for them or they're more perceptive.
And I don't know why. Every time I saw Mitch's name, I got excited. I was like, oh, Mitch.
Mitch is an amazing guy. He teaches a serial killer. He's also an adjunct up at Weber.
Okay.
And he teaches a serial killers class.
Well, I know what I'm doing.
You need to go.
God, we have tuition reimbursement, right?
Oh,
All right.
that's happening.
There you go. Yep. Mitch Pilkington, serial killers up at the CJ department. at
I'm
Weber
going to
State.
write that down when I listen to this again.
I was gonna say it's on audio.
Yeah.
We will have record of this.
He's a great, I mean, he's one of my best friends in the whole world. And that's one thing about this job too, is that when you've been through the fires, the crucible together, you either hate that person or you love them forever, and you have this bond. And there's certain guys, and Mitch is one of them, that just we're friends forever. We've just been through hell together. And what's weird about it is it feels comfortable. Like when we go through hell again for something, it just feels right. Here we are together, and the world's falling apart, but we're together, and life is good.
And it's gonna be okay.
It's hard to describe. I know it's one of those things when I retire, I'm totally going to miss. Like there's things that I hate about the job, getting woken up, and certain things, but there's other things that I'm just going to terribly miss, and that's that camaraderie and just. Sure. But Mitch, he, like I said, he teaches that serial killer class, and one of my favorite things to do is pop my head in while he's teaching it and disrupt him. Because I'll say, hey, Mitch, have you told the class about the time they used you as bait to catch a child molester? And then the class, like, what? And Mitch is like, shut up, Paul. And I'm like, have you told him? And then he has to tell me.
Oh, so I'm going to take the class, and then I'm going to raise my hand and be like, Paul told me to ask you.
Yeah, so because Mitch has a very boyish face. And we always tease him that that's why the ghost followed him home, because it's like, even the dead girls love you, Mitch. Because he's very boyish, very handsome, and so when they set traps for child molesters sometimes online, they will go and ask someone in law enforcement to give them a picture from high school, and then they use Mitch, and that just said like, there was lots of interest, and so I won't ruin the story for you because it'll give too many secrets away from law enforcement. But yeah, when you go take his class, I think he even teaches it at the Davis campus right now too, so that's even closer for you. It's an awesome class. He's a great professor. This could just be
Googling
Mitch,
as soon as we're done here.
The Mitch Love Fest.
I think you should definitely, even if it's a fiction book, I think you should have it star Mitch.
It wouldn't have to be fiction.
There you go.
Right. The Misadventures of Mitch.
Yes, but he's awesome. He's an amazing guy. Honored to know.
Any chance you're going to do anything on other paranormal topics? Being out at night, I'm sure you've got coworkers who've seen Bigfoot or
Werewolves.
Something strange up in the sky.
Vampires.
I don't know if I would have enough to write a book on, but I know officers who have had Bigfoot experiences.
I think a bonus chapter at the end of your next book,
That's true.
or a revised edition of this with a couple extra chapters.
And Bigfoot
you got
could
paranormal,
fit. And it's
paranormal
strange.
and strange.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, in Ogden Canyon, they're just up by Pineview Dam. Some officers had kind of an encounter.
So I think for next year's We Just School here, we'll go camping up there and see if we can find Bigfoot.
Hey, that's
going to be a hard pass.
Interesting.
I'm going to bring all the beef jerky, and Sasquatch is going to come chill with us.
You had me at beef jerky.
So one of my current coworkers named Jessica, she loves Bigfoot. She's obsessed with it. And her office is decorated with Bigfoot stuff. And so, yeah, she hopes to see him one day. So if we do that, we got to take Jessica.
All right.
Okay.
It's a plan. Next year, October 1st next year. This episode, if you're listening, it should be October 1st. Happy October. We're in kind of the last... it feels weird. It's only week 3 of our event, but it's kind of the home stretch of We Just School here. And I got to say, Paul, thank you very much for being on the show, being our first guest.
Well, my pleasure. This was awesome.
When you reached out to us, I was blown away that anyone would reach out to us, let alone someone who turned out to be local and we could actually sit down with and get to know. So,
well, I don't know if we're out of time.
No,
Okay.
we don't have a format
Okay,
necessarily. We go for as long or as short as we feel like
Great.
it.
The talk radio, the podcast format it's really taking off in our society today, because I have some really strong feelings about it, because the more we Facebook, the more we video game, the more we do all these things, they're supposed to bring us together, but they don't.
It's disjointed.
Yeah, there's even research out there that says the more time you spend on Facebook, the more depressed you are.
Yeah.
But something that isn't depressing, something that makes you feel joined with people, is this talking format.
Yeah.
And I listen to a little bit of sports radio, and the political sport talk radio I stay away from because it's so angry and divisive. But this, the podcast format like this, and the shows like Coast to Coast that have all these interesting topics, I cannot tell you how many nights, shifts where I've been going along and just I have another 6 hours to work, and I'm sick, and I'm exhausted, and all these things. And then you hear the theme music for Coast to Coast start to play, and it lifts your spirits.
Exactly, and it doesn't matter who is going to be on that night. It could be Michio Kaku talking about astrophysics, or it could be some guy from Illinois who thinks that Bigfoot lives in his shed. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, and podcasts are in the same thing. I mean, my phone is loaded with podcasts and different things, different downloads, because this is humanity right here. This is you and I, all of us sitting here talking, sharing stories, sharing our experiences.
You have to be able to craft a narrative. And the guys from Mysterious Universe, they're so interesting to listen to and engaging. And they suck you into the most ridiculous stories. And I love it. They always find an in into every crazy thing that they talk about, because they have had some truly moments. I subscribe to their show. To do that on the scale that they do it blows me away. I hope someday we got some library cards going by. Choo-choo.
It's empty though. Well, the format of people talking and sharing stories, it isn't alienating like so many of our social media and different things today. It brings people together.
Anyone can come in and join the conversation.
And I think storytelling is really our oldest art form. You go back to the dawn of humanity, and humans were telling each other stories. They started out as, hey, don't go into that cave over there, there's a bear. But it's our habit to embellish and make those stories better.
But it turned into, hey, one time I saw a bear.
Right. Like that bear over there, he grabbed my spear and he snapped it in half and it's just...
And all the while he was eating a sandwich.
Yeah, it's that storytelling component of us it is our oldest art form. And earlier this year, I had the honor to go to Greece on a trip, and it was I was nerding out. My daughter was laughing, and I was totally geeking out because I was like, so many things that are wonderful in our culture started right here. Like sports started right here, and Christianity got its big kick, right here. And since my name was Paul, I'm like, I have to go to those Paul sites, But when we were at the Parthenon, the tour guide pointed off the side of the hill, and there was this little tiny amphitheater that was really decrepit, and it was next to a big one that the Romans built. But she said that is where drama started right there. The first plays that we know of started right there. And the way she described it is it was all part of this religious festival. It was part of their ceremony and their ritual every year to retell the story of this god. And I think it was Dionysus. And I could be wrong. Sorry, guys out there, if you're a Greek historian.
It's probably Dionysus.
That sounds right.
If you're gonna retell any of the in ancient Greece, you're going to tell Dionysus.
He has the best copy. But anyway, so it was just part of their there was part of their ritual to tell the story, but then, hey, this guy tells the story better than this guy, so let's have him come back next year. Hey, wouldn't it be cool if they put on like a Dionysus costume? And like just starting from this religious obligation to tell the story, drama came of it. Theater and movies and all the things that all that came from that first place. And that's our human capacity to tell a story, but then make it a little better, make it a little more interesting, and yes. it was, and that's what this podcast, talk radio, those formats, that they're still alive and well. And I love the format. It is, like I said, it has helped me get through so many nights of just drudgery that I can't even count. I couldn't even count them.
Same here. My first graveyard shift almost 10 years ago, I remembered a friend of mine mentioned this radio show that was late night, and he's like, they talk about everything. And halfway through my first graveyard shift, I got out my phone and I was like, what's the name of the show? So I just started looking up Paranormal talk radio, and of course it was the first hit. And I've been, listening ever since. So,
yeah,
it really is, coast to coast especially, is that oasis in the night for people like us who have jobs that can sometimes be monotonous.
Well, and
Isolating, yeah. Because I was going to say, I have really only fallen in love with talk radio and podcasts in the last couple of years, but it's been in the time that I've been going through my divorce and trying to figure out, my whole life. And it's been, it really was kind of this tiny lifeline for me that was, grounding and humanizing. And
yeah, I didn't even listen to my first podcast until 3 years ago maybe. And after that, it was like the floodgates open, and all of a sudden I had, 8 things to listen to.
Right.
I had to start choosing, okay, which one am I going to listen to now? Get behind on this one or pick up that one. So it was.
Well, I think, the isolating, there's a lot of jobs, and when you're going through divorce or a health crisis or a crisis in your family or whatever, you can feel isolated. And I mean, it's this weird thing about law enforcement is you're out driving around at night, your family's home watching a movie or something, and you're driving around and you look in and you see windows of people's houses lit, and you can sometimes see them in there having dinner, and
you see that Norman Rockwell scene as drive by and go, I've got a big gulp.
Yep. Oh yeah, big gulp. The best 7-Eleven in Ogden is at 24th and Monroe. And the manager's name is Sonu. So if you're up in O-Town, go to 24th and Monroe and say hi to Sonu.
I like it.
Well, and another thing, too, about podcasts is, because I started listening to podcasts about 2 years ago as well when I started at our current job, because all I had was time to be plugged in, not talking to anybody, and, just on the computer. And focusing on work. So I was done. I had listened to all the music that I could stand at that point, and so I kind of fell down the rabbit hole. And then that's when I discovered that there's about 50 billion true crime podcasts, and I'm made me feel less like a freak.
And we have named all 8 of the other podcasts.
There's literally a podcast for anyone.
Yeah, and so it's there isn't something wrong with me. There's a lot of people who are interested in this, and
well, and you feel that because it's the storytelling format, you feel this human connection.
Yeah,
and you feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself.
Yeah,
and that's
what
drives us as a society.
And I think maybe we're really going far afield here, but I think if some of my
that's what this podcast is really good at.
So I think I said it in our first episode. Tangents are kind of where we live.
Okay, good. Well, some of my inspirations for writing, and I just think it's brilliant the way it was done. Certain movies, like if you think of Jaws or Raiders of the Lost Ark, or the original Fog from John Carpenter. They're cool movies, they have action, they have suspense or whatever, but for me, the best parts of those movies are when the characters are talking to each other about something. And so in Jaws, it's when they're all down in the galley and they're kind of drunk, but then the Quinn tells them about the USS Indianapolis and when the sharks got them. And there's no special effects. There's no when it's done right. There's not even any music really. There's just the story. And some people would say, "Oh, it's just exposition." Like, no, when it's done right, it's that once again we go back down to the humans. We love to tell stories.
It's almost like a bonus feature in the middle of the film.
And like in Raiders of the Lost Ark, my favorite scene, and it's from a writing perspective, it's brilliant because it sets up so many things. Is when they go into the library, Indiana Jones has his first adventure getting the trying to get the golden idol, and then the army guys want to talk to him about the headpiece of the Staff of Ra, and they're just sitting in this library, and they ask him the questions, and he starts talking about it, and they look in the Bible, and then the music starts to raise at the end. But it's so brilliant because it sets up all these different things, but once again, it's that storytelling aspect of it.
Yeah.
And then The Fog, John Carpenter's The Fog, at the beginning when John Houseman is telling the kids the campfire story on the edge of the beach about the ship that crashed. And those are my favorite parts of those movies because it's okay, exposition, but they're telling these stories. It connects us back to our favorite and oldest pastime stories. And I just love it.
And a lot of those you can pull out of the movie and they still work as a standalone story.
Yeah, and that's one of my criticisms of movies now, kind of the modern movie making ways. It's like, we can do anything with CG. Let's just, pull the ripcord and it runs, 2 hours of in your face.
Don't know how to slow down.
Yeah, there's none of that quiet time where the characters are talking. And I don't know, I love stories, apparently. You guys haven't been able to guess.
Couldn't tell.
Yeah.
That's my number
Some
one
about
love
writing a
story.
book.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've always liked the paranormal and the strange. When I was younger, I was terrified. I was a wuss when I was a kid. The mere mention of Nightmare on Elm Street or Child's Play or any monster would send me running. But ghosts never bothered me. And for some reason, Unsolved Mysteries was always a go-to show for me from the time I was like 5 years old on. And when I was a kid, it was all about the ghost episodes. If there was a ghost story, I was glued to the TV. And then as I got older, it's kind of shifted from ghosts into, extraterrestrial life and some of the more out there things. But there's something about a good ghost story still that can just draw me in and remind me of what brought me into liking these things in the first place.
I've met very few people who don't love a good ghost story.
Yeah.
It's just fun. It's just really fun.
So I think we'll wrap it up there. Paul, thank you again. For the last time, the name of the book is Fingerprints and Phantoms, True Tales of Law Enforcement Encounters with the Paranormal and the Strange, available wherever fine books are sold. Barnes & Noble and Amazon. Please, please, please pick it up. It's the perfect read for this time of year. We're just getting into October, and there's so much more to come. The stores finally have all of their Halloween stuff out. I just saw, for the first time, I know they've been on shelves forever, but this morning I found my Halloween Frosted Flakes, Apple Jacks, and what are they?
I want to try those
Tricks.
Frosted Flakes.
Yeah.
Are they pumpkin spice flavored?
They have pumpkin spice Frosted Flakes.
Oh.
But these are the chocolate ones with skeleton marshmallows.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And all of the cereal mascots cosplay on the boxes. Let's see. I think the Apple Jacks one, they are Fruity Yummy Mummy, and another one it's Fruit Brew. But not obviously them, but I love all of the Paul. I can't tell.
That's Josh's thing.
Yeah, cereal and
This is the
mascots,
funnest time.
and it is. So much is coming into the stores. A lot of times, the other websites that I read and podcasts I listen to started their Halloween stuff, 4 weeks before we did. And I thought starting at the end of September was, a little late, but there's so much this season that it's going to carry us through to Halloween, and I'm so excited for it.
Great.
If you haven't checked out our WordPress page, there is content there now. Our first blog article went up on September 21st, which we're recording the day after that. So this Friday, there'll be another article. I can't remember what it was about. And but you'll like it, read it, enjoy it. I worked hard on it. And last week, I hope you enjoyed our Mysterious Things of the Unknown countdown. All 5 of those articles about mysteries that should have been on Unsolved Mysteries, but for some reason weren't, whether it was because they were ignored completely or because they hadn't happened yet. So, but read those and imagine Robert Stack telling you about those at 9 o'clock on a stormy night, and have nightmares, please. We'll be back next week with another brand new episode. Nemo probably still won't be with us, but we'll have some fun stuff planned, and hopefully by the end of this event, me, Nemo, and Lisa will be able to sit down in a room together and bring you guys another episode.
Hopefully at some point you can actually have your 3 hosts together. Maybe.
Maybe, someday, if you pay us.
You had a great option here today.
Yeah, we do.
We'll always take Haley.
We got Haley. We
Haley.
have Mr. Raleigh, who is our only supporter on Patreon. So, Mr. Raleigh, thank you. If any of you aren't following Mr. Raleigh on Twitter, follow him at Mr. Raleigh. And he's got some really fun YouTube stuff.
Yeah, he's a Mr. Raleigh on Twitch, Twitter, Instagram.
Everywhere.
He's all over the place. So you can find him.
I love to hear from people on Facebook at Fingerprints and
There you
Phantoms
go.
Facebook page.
There you go.
Reach out and people tell me their ghost stories and stuff. I love to hear from people. So.
Awesome. Yeah. So
So
until
check out Mr. Rimmasch also on Facebook.
yes, at Fingerprints and Phantoms.
Yep.
There's just so much. I'm kind of like thrown on how to end an interview because we haven't had one yet. So thanks for being our guinea pig.
My pleasure.
So much.
Yeah. So yeah, until next time, we just ghoul here, and now you do boo. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.